You know, when you suggested we do a deep dive on this Hurricane Milton situation, I don't think either of us expected Florida to be bracing for another one so soon after Hurricane Helene.
Yeah.
It's like they're running out of hurricane names over there.
It's definitely a lot to handle.
Yeah.
Especially for a region that's still recovering from Helene.
For sure.
Yeah.
And from the articles you sent over, this whole thing about Tampa Bay has me a little worried.
Yeah.
Something about its geography makes it particularly vulnerable. Is that right?
That's right. Tampa Bay is shaped, well, think of it like a giant bathtub.
Okay.
It's a very shallow and kind of funnel-shaped, and you've got a very densely populated coastline. So if a hurricane like Milton makes a direct hit, we could be looking at a catastrophic storm surge situation.
Catastrophic storm surge. I mean, those are two words you never want to hear together.
Right.
But for our listener who maybe doesn't follow hurricanes as closely as we do, break that down for me. What are we talking about when we say catastrophic storm surge?
Imagine a wall of water, several feet high, being pushed inland by the force of the hurricane.
Oh, wow.
Homes and businesses completely flooded, infrastructure crippled. It could be devastating.
And it sounds like Tampa Bay's unique geography just amplifies that risk even more.
Exactly. The shape of the bay can actually funnel that water, make the storm surge even higher. And when we're talking about a potential hurricane, possibly even stronger than Helene, hitting by midweek.
This is from that E&E news article you sent, right?
Yeah.
It could be even worse than Helene in terms of flooding.
That's what the models are suggesting.
So we've got this vulnerable region. We've got a hurricane potentially making a beeline straight for it. What's the plan? What are officials saying?
Well, Governor DeSantis is already urging residents to prepare for potential evacuations.
Oh, wow.
He's even drawing parallels to Hurricane Irma back in 2017.
Vaguely, I remember that. Wasn't that when, like, millions of people had to evacuate?
It was massive, over 6.8 million people. And officials are saying this could be even bigger.
Wow.
The director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management, Kevin Guthrie, he was quoted in this article saying they're preparing for potentially the largest evacuations since Irma.
I mean, it's got to be scary for people down there, especially those still dealing with, the aftermath of Helene.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, how is the state even supposed to prepare for a new hurricane while they're still recovering from the last one?
Yeah. It
just seems impossible.
It's a huge logistical challenge for sure. I mean, you've got crews still out there clearing debris from Helene.
Right. Yeah.
Restoring power, providing aid to those affected. And now they're being asked to shift gears and prepare for something potentially even bigger.
Yeah. And you know what I was reading? I think it was in that Tampa Bay Times piece you sent.
Yeah.
Some of the debris removal teams that were in Florida for Helene, they've already left. They went to help with the recovery in North Carolina.
Right.
Isn't that going to make things even harder in Florida?
It could, definitely. Those contracted debris removal teams, they're usually the first line of defense in these situations. And if they're not there to handle the initial cleanup, both after Helene and then if Milton hits, it's going to create a huge bottleneck in the recovery process.
Right. So you've got the potential bottleneck with debris removal.
Right.
But then there's also just the issue of resources in general.
Right. Absolutely.
Like, what about FEMA? I mean, they're already stretched thin dealing with North Carolina. Do they even have the capacity to help Florida, too?
That's a major concern. FEMA is a national organization, sure, but they're dealing with a lot right now, and their resources are limited. They were initially directed to focus on North Carolina, which makes sense,
right,
given the damage there. But now, with Milton on the horizon, they're having to play catch-up and coordinate resources with Florida as well. It's a lot.
It's like a domino effect almost.
It is.
One disaster impacting another.
Exactly. And it really highlights how the nature of hurricanes is changing and how traditional approaches to disaster response are struggling to keep up. You mean, like, how they seem to be happening more frequently and they're more intense?
Exactly. This is a global trend we're seeing.
Yeah.
And it requires a whole new way of thinking about disaster preparedness.
So if this is the new normal, what does that mean for a state like Florida? I mean, it seems like they're on the front lines of hurricane season every single year.
They are. It means they might need to completely rethink their approach.
Okay.
Everything from evacuation plans to infrastructure investments to how they manage resources in the face of these back-to-back disasters. It's a massive undertaking.
So what are we talking about specifically? Like, what kind of changes would they need to make? It's almost like they need a whole new playbook for this new normal you're talking about.
Yeah, it's almost like they need to hit the reset button on how they approach these things.
Right. I mean, you're talking about reevaluating building codes,
Okay.
especially in vulnerable areas like Tampa Bay, strengthening power grids, improving drainage systems, creating more resilient transportation networks.
Right, because it's one thing to evacuate millions of people, but if the roads and bridges are damaged, it's not like they can go anywhere.
Exactly. The evacuation itself becomes a nightmare, and then there's the human element.
Oh, right.
How do you make sure that residents are informed, that they understand what's happening? And how do you deal with the potential for what we call evacuation fatigue?
Evacuation fatigue. I
Right.
never even heard that term before.
When storms are happening more and more frequently, people get tired of evacuating, especially if they've never experienced a major hurricane firsthand.
Right. They're like, oh, it'll be fine.
Right. They start tuning out the warnings. So you've got to find new ways to convey that seriousness.
So how do you do that? I mean, how do you really get people to understand that this isn't just another storm? This could be really bad.
Right. And that's something that emergency management officials are really grappling with, especially in hurricane-prone regions.
And then there's the whole financial aspect to this, too. I imagine this is going to have a major impact on things like insurance and disaster relief.
Absolutely. Insurance premiums are going to keep going up as these events become more frequent and more intense.
Right.
And for a lot of people, it's going to become unaffordable.
Right. And they're even for the government. I mean, FEMA can't do everything.
Exactly. Resources are not limitless.
So it feels like we're almost at a tipping point where the old ways of doing things just aren't going to cut it anymore.
I think we're already there. And that's really what this situation in Florida highlights. It's not just about Hurricane Milton or even Hurricane Helene.
Right.
It's a glimpse into the future. These compounding disasters, they're becoming more and more common.
Sobering thought for sure. Well, hopefully by diving into this with you today, our listener is walking away with a better understanding of not just these hurricanes, but the bigger picture challenges they represent.
Absolutely. Because the more we understand these complex issues, the better equipped we'll be to deal with them.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And for our listener, if this deep dive has left you wanting to learn even more about hurricane preparedness or the impact of climate change on our world today, I encourage you to do your own research. We've only scratched the surface here. There's a whole world of information out there waiting to be explored.